My wife cheated on me with our neighbor, stole $200, $0 worth of jewelry and property, then filed for divorce claiming I was abusive. Now she's trying to take our house and my inheritance, and I just found out she's been secretly working with a lawyer for months. Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Emily, turned out to be the biggest piece of trash I've ever met. Honestly, I thought we had a solid life. We had our ups and downs, sure, but I never imagined she'd cheat on me with our neighbor, steal hundreds of thousands worth of jewelry and property, and then try to take everything I had left, our house, my inheritance, while she was secretly working with a lawyer for months behind my back. It's like some twisted soap opera, and I'm the fool who didn't see it coming. We met about 10 years ago. I was 35, she was 32. She was hot, confident, a little bitchy, but charming enough. We got married after about 3 years of dating. I thought I knew everything about her, her favorite movies, her ambitions, her dreams. She'd always been ambitious, slightly materialistic, but I figured that was just her personality. She was good with money, or so I thought. We had a nice house in a decent neighborhood, a good life. I was a successful businessman running my own company, and I thought we had everything we needed. But then things started to change. Small things at first, missing jewelry, strange late nights, her phone ringing at odd hours. I brushed it off. She'd always been a little bitchy when I'd ask about her late nights, saying I was paranoid or that I didn't trust her. She'd get defensive, call me insecure, and accuse me of snooping. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe I was just overthinking, that she was busy with her job, or maybe she was just stressed. But then the signs got worse. One day, I noticed our jewelry box was lighter. I'd kept a collection of expensive watches and jewelry, stuff I inherited from my family. I kept a mental note of what was there, and suddenly a few pieces were missing. I asked Emily about it, and she just laughed it off, said I was imagining things. But I knew better. I started paying more attention. Her behavior was weird. She was secretive about her phone, deleting messages, avoiding eye contact when I asked about her whereabouts. She started working late more often, claiming she had big projects at work. Then I caught her one night, walking out of the neighbor's house just as I was pulling into the driveway. She looked flushed, her hair a mess, and she barely acknowledged me. I froze. My gut told me something was wrong. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, I felt something was off. I decided to dig deeper. That's when I started noticing the bank statements. Large withdrawals, secret accounts I didn't know about. I found out she'd been secretly working with a lawyer, probably to set up some kind of legal shield, I guess, to protect her assets or prepare to take what she wanted. The whole thing was happening behind my back. I started feeling sick. How could I have been so blind? I thought I knew her. I thought she loved me. But she was out there screwing around, stealing from me, and planning her escape route. The final straw came when I found her text messages with the neighbor, an affair that had been going on for months. She'd arranged secret meetings, even had the nerve to send him naked pictures. That's when I knew this wasn't just a fling. She was cheating, stealing, and lying. All at once, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My marriage, my life, everything I built crumbling in a matter of days. I confronted her the next morning. I was furious, hurt, betrayed. I laid out all the evidence I'd collected, her texts, the missing jewelry, the bank statements, her reaction. She called me paranoid, crazy, and then started to scream that I was abusive, that I'd hurt her feelings. She told me I was overreacting, that she loved me, and that I was just jealous. But I could see through her lies. She was trying to spin it all, make me the bad guy, while she was out there, screwing the neighbor, stealing my stuff, and plotting her escape. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she lie to my face, pretend everything was fine while she was out there screwing around and lining her pockets? I was angry that she'd stolen from me $200, zero worth of jewelry, our property, and probably more. I was devastated to realize I had been blind for so long. I thought I knew her. I thought I loved her. But it turns out she was just using me, playing me like a fool, all while secretly working with her lawyer to take everything I had left. That's where I stand now. I'm trying to piece my life back together, but I'm furious. Furious at her, furious at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I'm trying to decide what to do next, whether to fight her legally or just walk away and start over. Honestly, I don't even know if I'll ever trust again. But one thing, for sure, I'll never let someone manipulate and betray me like this again. After everything I found out, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, thinking about the jewelry, the secret accounts, her affair with the neighbor, and most of all, how she had the nerve to lie straight to my face. I kept replaying the moment I confronted her, watching her fake innocence, her fake tears, her desperate attempts to gaslight me into believing I was crazy. It infuriated me. How could she think she could get away with it? How could she think I wouldn't find out? The first thing I did after that confrontation was dig into her phone. I needed proof that she was planning something, proof of her affair, proof of the money she'd stolen. I started going through her messages, her emails, her call logs. It was disgusting. There were dozens of messages with the neighbor, Ryan, clearly more than just friendly banter. They'd arranged secret meetups, exchanged explicit sex videos, and talked about how they were going to run away together once she took everything from me. And the money. I found out she'd been siphoning off cash for months, transferring it to her lawyer's account, hiding it in offshore accounts. It was all meticulously planned. She'd been working with her lawyer, Lisa, who I later found out was a specialist in divorce and asset protection. Lisa had been advising her on how to hide the jewelry, transfer property, and essentially cheat her way to a clean break with my money. I couldn't believe it. She was orchestrating her own betrayal with a lawyer. That's when I realized I was dealing with a professional con artist. I felt sick. My trust was shattered and rage took over. I knew I had to act fast before she managed to drain everything and walk away with my inheritance and our house. I also knew I'd need legal help, someone who could see through her lies, her manipulations, and her schemes. I started looking for a lawyer right away, someone experienced in high-stakes divorce and asset recovery. I wanted to make sure she didn't get away with anything. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on her. She was still sneaking around, meeting Ryan, making plans to move out, and pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had proof now, screenshots, bank records, her own texts. I was gathering everything, every lie she told, every secret rendezvous. I knew she'd try to spin her way out of it, claim I was abusive or unstable, but I had the evidence to shut her down. One night I caught her sneaking out again. I followed her discreetly and she met Ryan at a secluded spot near the lake. I watched from a distance as they kissed, whispered, and made plans to leave town. That was the final push. I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let her take everything I had worked for, my house, my inheritance, my future. I decided I'd fight her legally, and I'd do whatever it took to keep what was mine. The next day, I called my lawyer. We drafted a restraining order, filed for an emergency hearing, and started the process to freeze her accounts. I also hired a private investigator. I needed to know everything, her contacts, her plans, her next moves. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. I'd been blindsided, but now I was determined to fight back. I would expose her for what she truly was, a cheat, a thief, and a liar. Meanwhile, she kept up her act. She pretended to be the loving wife, the victim, even accused me of abuse in her divorce filing, claiming I'd hit her, yelled at her, called her names. It was all lies. I never laid a finger on her, but she knew how to spin it. She's good at playing the victim, especially when she's caught red-handed. I saw through it, but it still hurt. How could someone I loved turn into this monster? How could she betray everything we built for a quick affair, a few stolen jewels, and a lie that would ruin us both? I'm not gonna lie. It's hard. Every day I wake up feeling like I've been punched in the stomach. I look around at the house, at the life I thought we had, and I feel emptier than ever. I keep asking myself where I went wrong, how I missed all these signs. I trusted her, I loved her, and she threw it all away for some guy next door and a pile of stolen jewelry. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life, but I'm not giving up. Not yet. I've got the evidence, I've got the lawyer, and I've got my resolve. I'm going to fight for what's mine. I want her out of my life, out of my house, and I want her to pay for what she's done. That's where I stand now, fighting to keep what's left of my life intact while she's out trying to manipulate her way to a payday. And honestly, I don't know how this is going to end. All I know is I'm done being the victim. I'm done being the fool. It's time to take control and see this through to the end. The legal battle is where things really started to spiral. Once I handed over all the evidence, screenshots of her affair, bank records, her secret messages with Ryan, and the proof of her planning to leave, I saw how deep her lies went. My lawyer, Lisa, was sharp. She knew exactly how to handle these kinds of cases, especially when someone tries to hide assets or manipulate the system. But even with her expertise, I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. The first thing Lisa did was file for an emergency injunction to freeze her accounts and prevent her from selling or transferring any more property. I wanted to make sure she couldn't just run off with everything while the divorce was ongoing. Meanwhile, I kept digging, hearing the private investigator who uncovered even more. Turns out, Emily had been secretly working with Lisa for months, planning how to shield her assets, hide jewelry, and make sure she'd come out ahead in the divorce. I wasn't just dealing with a wife who cheated. I was dealing with a calculated criminal. The moment I saw the paperwork Lisa presented, documents showing her attempts to transfer property into her sister's name, offshore bank accounts, and even fake receipts for jewelry that was supposedly lost, it hit me hard. She was serious about walking away with my money, my inheritance, my house, everything I'd worked for. That's when I realized I had to get ahead of her or she'd strip me of everything. The divorce proceedings moved fast after that. Emily filed for it, claiming I'd been abusive, which was pure nonsense. She painted herself as the victim, saying I yelled at her, called her names, and that I'd physically hurt her. It was classic gaslighting, but I had witnesses, text messages, and statements from friends that proved I'd never laid a finger on her. Still, her lawyer hammered on the abuse angle, trying to sway the judge. I knew her game, though. She was desperate. Meanwhile, Emily's behavior grew more erratic. She started to act like she was the innocent victim, crying in court, claiming she was afraid of me, crying about how I supposedly hurt her. She even went as far as accusing me of emotional abuse, which was laughable. I stayed calm, kept my cool, and let my lawyer handle the legal stuff. I knew if I lost my temper, she'd spin it into more proof of her victim narrative. The worst part was the emotional toll. Every day I'd wake up feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach again. The house, which I thought was our sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I'd look at her empty side of the bed, the jewelry missing, and wonder how I'd been so blind. I'd trusted her, loved her, and she had been secretly screwing around, stealing from me and plotting her escape. I'd never felt so betrayed in my entire life. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew I had to be strong. I wasn't going to let her take everything without a fight. I spent hours reviewing every piece of evidence, preparing for court, and making sure I had everything I needed to prove her lies. I wasn't just fighting for money or a house. I was fighting to reclaim my dignity, my reputation, and my future. One thing I learned during this process is how manipulative and ruthless some people can be when they're desperate. Emily was no longer the woman I married. She was a con artist hiding behind a pretty face, trying to spin her way out of her own mess. And I was the fool who believed in her. Now, I was realizing how much damage a person can do when they're willing to betray everything for greed, sex, and a quick escape. I also started to see how some people will go to any lengths to avoid responsibility. Emily's lawyer, Lisa, was no different. She was helping her hide assets, craft stories, and manipulate the system. It was like watching a chess game. Every move she made was to protect her client at any cost. I knew I had to stay one step ahead. I hired my own investigator to monitor her movements, and I kept pushing for a full financial disclosure. I wanted to see everything, every dollar, every asset, every lie. At this point, I was exhausted but determined. I knew this was going to be over anytime soon, but I also knew I couldn't let her win. I had to keep fighting, not just for the money, but for my sanity, my reputation, and my future. And I was starting to realize that this was only the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. The court hearings were a nightmare. Emily showed up looking like she was auditioning for some kind of sympathy role, crying, clutching tissues, acting helpless. She played the victim perfectly, claiming I was an abusive monster who had been controlling and violent. It was all a lie, but that didn't matter. Her lawyer, Lisa, was feeding her lines, pushing her to push the narrative that I was dangerous. Meanwhile, I sat there, trying to keep my composure, knowing I had the evidence to tear her story apart, but it was exhausting. I remember the day Lisa handed me a stack of documents, false police reports, fake witness statements, and some carefully crafted affidavits claiming I'd hit her. It was enough to make my blood boil. I knew she was trying to paint me as the bad guy so she could get full custody of the house and most of my inheritance. But I had the truth on my side. I had the evidence of her affair, the stolen jewelry, and her secret accounts. It was all about to come out, and I was determined to make sure it did. The judge was skeptical at first, especially when Emily started her tearful act, but I could see through her. I presented my evidence, screenshots of her exchanging explicit sex with Ryan, bank statements showing withdrawals and transfers, the documents showing her attempts to hide assets. I had everything laid out in black and white. I could tell the judge was starting to see through her lies. Her face contorted when I brought up her affair, and she tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Emily's lawyer tried to spin her story even more, claiming I was emotionally abusive and that I'd threatened her. But I had witnesses, friends who saw her sneaking around, texts where she admitted to the affair, and my private investigators' reports. I knew this was my chance to expose her for what she really was, a thief, a cheat, and a liar. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Anger that she'd betrayed me so completely, and relief that I was finally fighting back with the truth. The judge listened carefully and asked tough questions. I explained how Emily had been secretly working with her lawyer, trying to hide jewelry, transfer assets, and cheat her way out of our marriage. I told the court about her affair with Ryan, her attempts to steal my inheritance, and her lies about abuse. It was a long, draining process, but I could see her losing her composure. Her tears turned to anger, and she shot me a look full of venom. She knew she was losing. In the end, the judge made some critical rulings. He ordered her to return the jewelry she'd stolen. Most of it was found hidden in her closet, in a false bottom of a jewelry box. He also granted me sole ownership of the house, citing her financial misrepresentations and her attempts to hide assets. The court also ordered her to pay back a significant portion of the stolen money, and she was hit with fines for her perjury and fraudulent filings. I felt a small wave of relief, but I knew this wasn't over yet. There was still more to fight for, especially with the divorce settlement and her trying to manipulate the system. Emily's face was red with rage as she stormed out of the courtroom. She kept shouting, calling me every name under the sun, accusing me of ruining her life. I just sat there, exhausted but victorious, knowing I'd done everything I could to protect what was mine. I realized that her lies and manipulations had been her way of avoiding responsibility, but the truth had finally come out. I'd fought for my dignity, my assets, and my future, and I'd won some battles, at least for now. That night, I went home alone, feeling a strange emptiness. The house was too quiet without her. I looked around at the mess she'd left behind, her clothes, her makeup, the empty jewelry boxes. It hit me hard how much I'd loved her, how much I'd trusted her. All of it was gone now. I'd been betrayed in the worst way, and I was left standing in the ruins of what I thought was a life built on love. But I also knew I had to keep moving forward. I could let her destroy everything I'd worked so hard for. I had to rebuild piece by piece and learn how to trust again, if that was even possible after all this. I started making plans, not just legally but emotionally. I needed therapy, I needed to process what had happened, and I needed to figure out how to move on. I realized I'd been carrying the burden of her lies for too long. Now, it was time to take control. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I'd stand tall even if it meant starting from scratch. Because if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that some people will do anything for money, sex, and power. And I'd better be ready for the fallout. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, financial audits, and sleepless nights. Emily was relentless in trying to manipulate the system. She hired a new lawyer, Lisa's rival, trying to spin her narrative even more, claiming I was trying to ruin her life. But I had the evidence and I had my lawyer's experience. Every time she filed a new motion, Lisa was ready with counterarguments that exposed her lies. Still, it was exhausting to see her keep fighting dirty, trying to sway the judge with tears and false accusations. The most frustrating part was her ongoing attempt to control the narrative, painting herself as the victim, even after everything she'd done. She kept insisting I was emotionally abusive, that I'd hit her or yelled at her during fights, which was all lies. I had witnesses who could confirm I'd never laid a hand on her, and I made sure the court knew that. Still, she kept trying to paint me as the villain, hopping to get full custody of the house or even more money from me. Meanwhile, I was focusing on protecting what I still had left. I managed to get a court order that limited her access to our joint accounts, which she was still trying to drain. I also discovered she'd been secretly transferring some of the jewelry and assets into her sister's name, more schemes to hide what she was stealing. I filed motions to freeze those accounts and get the jewelry back, which the court approved. I also hired a forensic accountant to go through her financials, an eye-opening experience. I learned she'd been funneling money into offshore accounts and even buying property in her sister's name. She was trying to set up a new life, one where I couldn't touch her. Throughout all this, I felt an overwhelming mixture of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. I trusted Emily for years. I thought she was my partner, my wife. And it turns out she was just a con artist scheming behind my back. The pain of seeing her lie in court, pretending to be the victim while I had proof of her affair, theft, and deception, was almost unbearable. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs. How did I not see she was planning this all along? It made me feel stupid, naive, like I'd been played. But I also knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her drag me down into her chaos. I spent hours reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, making sure I was prepared for whatever she threw next. I wanted to win this, not just for the money or the house, but for my own sanity. I'd been a fool for trusting her, but I wasn't going to be a fool anymore. I was determined to hold onto what was rightfully mine and make sure she paid for her lies and her betrayal. One of the hardest parts was watching her try to manipulate the kids, trying to turn them against me, painting me as the bad guy. I knew I had to be the responsible parent, even if she was trying to poison their minds. I kept my distance, stayed calm, and let my lawyer handle the custody battles. I wanted the truth to come out, not her lies. I knew deep down that the evidence was on my side, but it didn't make it easier to see her trying to turn the kids against me. The worst moment was when she finally admitted in court that she'd been working with Lisa on the asset hiding schemes. It was a huge blow, but also a relief, proof that she'd been caught in her own lies. The judge ordered her to repay the stolen money, and I was awarded sole custody of the house. I felt a tiny spark of victory, but it was bittersweet. I'd lost trust, I'd lost the marriage I thought was forever, and now I was rebuilding from the ashes. I started to focus on my future. I contacted financial advisors, looked into rebuilding my savings, and considered moving to a different place. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I also knew I couldn't keep living in the past. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but I was learning to accept it. I learned that some people will do anything for money, sex, and power, and that trusting blindly can cost you everything. Now, I had to decide what kind of life I wanted to build after all this. One thing was clear, I wasn't going to let her destroy me, not without a fight. The final court date was a whirlwind. Everything had come to a head. Her attempts to manipulate, deny, and spin her story were falling apart under the weight of the evidence. I watched her in court, her face pale and frantic as the judge read out the rulings. She had lost the house, most of her claims for custody, and the court ordered her to pay back the money she'd stolen. Honestly, a part of me felt relief, like finally closing a chapter of betrayal and lies. But underneath it all, I knew the scars would stay with me for a long time. When it was over, I packed up what remained of her belongings from the house, some clothes, a few personal items, and left her standing there, fuming and defeated. I felt a strange mixture of emptiness and liberation. All the nights spent crying, the anger, the heartbreak. Somehow, I was finally free from the nightmare she'd created. I realized I'd spent so much energy fighting her, trying to hold on to what I thought was ours, but in the end, I had to accept that some things just couldn't be salvaged. I moved out into a new place, far from the memories and the betrayal. It wasn't easy, starting over after a decade of marriage, but I knew I had no choice. I had to rebuild piece by piece. I cut ties with most of her family, who had been complicit or at least silent in her schemes. I focused on my health, my work, and reconnecting with friends who had supported me through all of this. The trust I once had in people is gone, but I learned to rely on myself more. Looking back, I see how naive I was to believe that love alone could protect me from betrayal. Emily was a master manipulator. She knew how to hide her true intentions, lie convincingly, and play the victim when it suited her. I learned that money and sex can corrupt even the most seemingly stable relationships, and that some people will do anything for a quick escape or a financial windfall. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's almost impossible to repair. But I also learned something else: how to stand up for myself, how to fight for what's rightfully mine, and how to recognize red flags before it's too late. I wish I'd seen the signs earlier, but I guess some lessons only come the hard way. Now, I know I'll never let anyone manipulate me like that again. I've become more cautious, more guarded, but also more aware of what real loyalty looks like. Most importantly, I've come to accept that life moves on. The pain will fade and I will find happiness again, just on my own terms. I don't need someone to complete me. I need to be whole on my own. That's the biggest lesson I take away from all this. Never trust blindly, never ignore the signs, and always protect what's yours. Because at the end of the day, nobody else is going to do it for you.